Introduce our presentation tonight with a little video clip of their performance.
Thank you. Up on the screen is actually one of the rehearsals. For those of you who aren't aware, but most of you who are here tonight for All County know this. When students are selected for All County, these are the best of the best in Nassau County based on their NISMA scores. The students rehearse for 3 times before they do a performance at LIU CW Post. So what we're going to take a look at this evening is the Level 5 All County Band, in which 5 of our Level 5 high school students are in there. But this is one of their rehearsals just before they performed at CW Post. One of those tuba players that you saw the back of their head is one of our high school students, which is why we have the view from there. But this was a Facebook Live video that one of the chair people shot while they were rehearsing.
And I'd like to ask Mrs. Shapiro if you would continue with the presentation.
Certainly. So All County offers a lot of opportunities, not only for students, but for teachers as well, and we're going to recognize our teachers tonight. Teachers have the opportunity to become chair people for the different groups. It's a totally voluntary position, and 3 of our teachers from Long Beach volunteered this year. Justin Marks, Christina Farrell, and Dave Lobenstein volunteered to be chair people for the various groups that are at All County. So I wanted to say that for them. So I'm going to ask my other teachers who are here and help with handing out the certificates. So we have Christina Farrell, Vanessa Crowley, Noelle Politastro, and Doug Renault. The first group that we're going to recognize are the elementary school students. So if you can hold your applause until the end after I've read all of the names. And students, please come forward when we hear your name and get your certificate from one of the teachers here. Madison Bradley, Leora Brown, Kira Brunick Davis, Shay Breimer, Dylan Dean, I know I'm going to not pronounce this right, Anna Sophia Chabarriaga, Isabel De Palma, Alexandra Famighetti, Spencer Gauss, Jessica Greenblatt, Olivia Dial, Sienna Hornberger, Wyatt Katzen, Matthew McCaffrey, Sophia Medina, Jackson Monty, Karen Morris, Summer Reeves, Ryan Reebley, Daniel Robinson, Perrin Rotondo, Nate Stark, Theo Turba, and Alvin Wright. Okay, next up we have the students from Long Beach Middle School, starting with Samuel Adler, Ryan Allen, Alejandro Selleck, Ariel Damiani, Orly Kenyon, Leka Khan, Megan Maya, Riley Roberts. I apologize, hang on one second. Thank you. Sorry about that, we have a few more middle school students here. Wyatt Parker, Abigail Quigley, Noah Robinson, Liam White, Cameron Churchfield, Jared Hagan, Natalia Tuesday, Jacob Locascio, Isabella McCaffrey, Matthew O'Connor, Daniel O'Connor, and three more, Maren Asher, Jason Moon, and Kenneth Bailey. Sophia Mangle, Aaron Rockman, Madeline O'Connor, Chandler Rosenstead, Matthias Rath, Jasmine Soriano, John Avery, Alex Chapin, Kylie Cregan, Caitlin Devine, Olivia DeResta, Claire Edradi, Shane McMahon, Harrison Phillips, Alex Ramirez, Samantha Snow, Alyssa Thompson, Brett Wiener, Logan Friedman, Joshua Papillion, and Thomas Welch. Thank you so much to the Board of Ed for recognizing I'd like to congratulate our students on their wonderful achievements, and now I am sure you need to work with your
Did you need this?
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Getting these NHS hours in. This is what it's about. Grinding. Right after theater, go home and eat. And then I sit here with this bad tripod of mine and go like that. And just, yeah.
You have to eat it or just...
No, I don't. No way. It's like 3 hours long. There's no way. Yeah. Last time I went to like Temple, it was like shit. I was like, wow. Yeah, congratulations, sir. Yep, see you tomorrow. We got practice, bud. And he said, oh yeah.
Okay, good evening, everybody. We're going to move into the next portion of the meeting. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the budget, but before we talk about the budget, I want to just give the board and the community who's here a little bit of an update on FEMA. So we were happy to get some more FEMA money 2 weeks ago. We got another reimbursement payment of about $1.2 million. So I just wanted to take a little bit of a look. We've been keeping this spreadsheet, and just bear with me as I sort through it. Total estimated damage. So this category was something that was established 5 years ago when we started to put together an estimate of our damage. So it's not the total final damage, but it's the estimated damage. So at this point, you see here we have all of these different project worksheets, okay? And they each have their own number and their own name. They're both mostly based on building, but some of it has to do with EPM as emergency protective measures. content of all the content that was in our buildings. And you see here, they all have a separate worksheet with the dollar value. And I will have access, and if anybody wants a copy of this, they can certainly have a copy, but I just wanted to go through this quickly. You see 35.8 is the estimated total damage to the school district of all of our buildings, including the emergency protective measures and the content. We think it's going to be higher. As you see here, there's a note here that the total estimated damage will increase based on the submission of closeout documents. We're in that closeout phase now, where we're closing out on all the different project worksheets and seeking our 10% reimbursement from the state. So the estimate versus what the final is, we think is maybe going to be about $1 million. So in terms of what was actually done, when everything was said and done in each building, is a little bit higher. So you multiply maybe, 20,000 or so, or maybe 100,000, depending on which building, and it adds up to another $1 million based on the close to 20 different project worksheets we had. So we started with our total estimated. Then we have all the insurance that we received, right? We have our flood and excess flood that we had wind insurance, we had builder's risk insurance, we had inland marine insurance, and you take a look at all those totals, and you see you had the $1 million, about $700,000, $2.6 million, another $1 million. It adds up to about over $5 million of insurance that we received, okay, from our different policies. What's after that is something that's then called the eligible amount from FEMA. Let's do that for a second. And these are the deductibles from the insurance. And the deductibles add up to about $1.2 million. Okay? We hope to get that back. We may not get that back. That's like the last thing that we were to get back is to get from New York State our deductibles back. They said they may give it to us. They were a little bit vague. We've had conversations about it with them. The $29.3 million is actually the amount that is the PW amount minus insurance, right? So it's the estimate minus about the $5 million of insurance, and that's what's left of the PWs, and the federal share is 90% of that. FEMA says they will reimburse us 90% of the federal share, and that's the total estimate, or whatever is final, after the insurance deductions, okay? So where are we with our 90% share? We're supposed to get back 26.3, and so far we've received 24.5. All right, a lot of hard work went into getting the $24.5 million from FEMA. Okay, we only have a little bit shy of $2 million left to recover, and that now is going to be part of this closeout process. So as we close out about 20 different project worksheets and working hard, and it's a back and forth, because a lot of these project worksheets now run something called quality review, where they have different federal officials that are inspecting all of our work, all of our receipts, everything that we've submitted, to make sure that they can actually give us the final money on closeout. So we're waiting to get about $2 million from FEMA, and as we close out each project worksheet, then we can see the balance of New York State. Okay? And that's 10%. So let's go down to the total here. You see that's about 1.8 based on the estimate that we're supposed to get back from FEMA, and about 2.9, about 3 million. So to round up, what I usually like to say is we're expecting back about 2 million from FEMA, that's still what's left, and about 3 million from New York State. And then if they want to reimburse us for those deductibles, that's an additional 1.2 million. And that's where we are in terms of all the work that we've been doing to get our money back from our storm recovery efforts. So I'd like to take a moment to segue and talk a little bit about, last week I was asked to participate in something called the Peer Mentoring Program. So the United States Department of Health and Human Services contacted Long Beach, contacted our district, and they contacted a few others. They contacted Nassau BOCES, they contacted East Rockaway, I know those are other districts who participated, and they asked us to send a superintendent or a superintendent's representative down to work with school district officials down in South Texas, to work with the officials who were impacted by Hurricane Harvey. So last week they paid for me to fly down and participate in a full-day program down with people who would be equivalent of our BOCES, so about 50 different district superintendents who attended a full-day workshop. And I was there along with some presentation tonight is the mental health piece, and how we can rebuild in terms of our physical structures, but it's the students who are still, suffering. And what I did share with them is, no matter what moving up ceremony or graduation that I've attended over the past 5 years, all of the students mentioned Hurricane Sandy. In their remarks, they all mentioned the hurricane and the impact that had on them. And I said to the Texas school district officials, is just expect that this is something that is going to be with the students that experience the storm, with them for the rest of their lives, and especially as impressionable young students. And we talked a lot about a whole host of different topics. So it was really wonderful to participate and share not just the nuts and bolts about how to get your money back from FEMA, but and how to structure and deal with an audit, because I talked to them about the audit that we had from the federal government, but to talk about how to rebuild a community. And what I did say to them was how important it was for us, the board in particular, to make sure that we got our schools back up and running 2 weeks after the storm. Yes, we shared buildings, and yes, it was difficult, and we bussed kids back from other places outside the district, but we knew that was an important part of rebuilding our community, and that really hit home to them. So I just wanted to share with the board that it was really a wonderful experience and an opportunity to share our Long Beach story with the federal government at the Department of Health and Human Services. And this is the beginning of this peer mentor program. So they have my number, they have my contact information if they need anything in the future. And I know this is a program that they're going to be replicating after every natural disaster that happens across the country to develop these peer mentors. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And I also wanted to mention to the board that next board presentation, we're going to talk about some capital projects that we're doing. There's going to be an item that's going to be on the agenda talking about a proposition that we're going to put on the ballot, and that has to do with upgrading our facilities for security. So even though I was down in Texas talking about our storm story and what we did to rebuild, of course the topic of conversation, this was going back about 10 days ago, had to do with the aftermath of Parkland. And that was also on everybody's mind. There was a lot of different networking. And again, hearing about that all school districts, whether you're in Texas or whether it was in the Midwest, are grappling with how do you now operate in this environment that we're in. And I was able to share with them and be proud of the fact that in Long Beach we started to really build up our security years ago. When we first did the bond issue, about 8 years ago, actually 10 years ago that we were talking about it, right? About 9 years ago that the bond passed, we already put in that bond issue, upgrading our security vestibules and doing what we needed to do from our facilities. So we really knew years ago that this was something that was important to our community to beef up our security. And over the years, every year we do more, right? Last year, we had a commitment to just really intensify our drills and go over our emergency preparedness. So when I had an opportunity to talk a little about with some of the staff and some other people who asked questions from the community, well, what are you doing now in response to what happened in Parkland? I was able to say, well, yeah, we're going to be more vigilant about some of our procedures, but we've been talking about this for years, and every year doing more, every year seeing what else we can do to make sure that our students and staff are safe. Last summer, we started building a security vestibule in the high school, way before Parkland, okay? We did whatever we need to do to beef up the situation about the security at East. We already put in our security vestibules at the other schools years ago. So I would like to share with the board that something that we did do when we met facilities director and our security and some of our building principals was to talk about some of the protocols, best practices. So for example, when a visitor comes to the building, what is it that you do? Does the visitor have an appointment? Make sure that visitor has an appointment. Make sure that visitor is escorted to wherever that visitor needs to go and escorted out. So things, best practices about security protocols is something I'd like to share with the board that we have spoken about with our building principals and with staff and that we're implementing. So in terms of what else we could do with our buildings, it goes back to the first point I was making, was that on the ballot proposition, we are going to have a couple of items that we're going to ask the voters to spend our capital reserve money. And we're going to talk about this next week because it's going to be on the agenda. Things that we want to do at the high school, things that we want to do throughout our other buildings in terms of our security infrastructure. So I just wanted to let the board know that we've done things before. You know, we've intensified some of our review of drills and our debriefing this year from September. Our first board presentation was on emergency preparedness this year in September, because we knew it was an issue well before the park run situation that we needed to make sure everyone was on board and was on the same page in terms of what to do. And we're going to continue to have these conversations and continue to look and see what else we can do. We are going to bring in a consultant to take a look and see if there's anything else that we can do that needs to go before the board for their consideration. And we will continue to take a look and make sure that we can keep our staff and students as safe as possible. So now I'd like to go into the budget presentation, if that's okay. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about general education, in particular the high school. The last time we had a budget presentation in February, we talked about elementary and middle school. So today's our opportunity to talk about general education, and in particular the high school. And then we'll go into talking about district special education and PPS and the different functions with special education in particular. We're going to focus on department staffing, because most of our expenses are in staffing, and that really has to do with most of the programming. We are going to be looking at high levels of department totals, but also go into some specific line by lines in these areas about students going to BOCES programs, some of the out-of-district special education programs, and some other throughout New York State of the private schools. As a review, as we go through different presentations talking about instruction, we're always going to be looking at the 4 object areas. Staffing, right? And if you want to understand what the staffing codes are, they're always going to, after the first function, you're going to start with the 1. We're going to be talking about equipment, such as the bake oven at the high school we talked about last time is an example of an equipment item. The district-wide dues for scholastic art, writing, are in another section of the budget. In what's called for vendor services, we do things of those types of costs, and then supplies are always going to start with the 500. This is just a way to orient you, if you're ever looking at our line by line, what do all the codes mean? First 4 digits, A2110, has to do with general instruction. The next 3 digits has to do with, are you talking about salaries? Are you talking about equipment? Are you talking about vendor services? Or are you talking about the supplies? The next 2 digits are location. The first example is 11, that's Lindell. Second example, 22, that's the location for the high school. Third is 25, that's a district-wide code, where it doesn't go to one building or another. And the last is 15, that's something that we designate for our pre-K program. The last 4 digits are mostly going to be 00s, but for some it's a program code, right? So 14 has to do with art program. And that's just how you orient yourself to understanding the line by line. The line by line has, thousands of different codes in it that encompass about 135 to 140 million of our budget. General education expenditures, just to give you the context, what we're proposing for next year is about close to 39 million of general education, and that's everything that we just talked about. That's all the salaries for general education, all the equipment, all of our vendor services, and all the supplies. But the most part is salaries. And you see here some notes, what I talk about in terms of why is there a variance. Okay, there's a variance for the most part because of salary and step increases. All right, that's the bulk of our additional costs, is as staff move along the salary schedule. But it's offset when someone retires. We get to hire someone who's a junior person, and it's a lower salary. So it's a little bit cheaper. So you'll see we save a little bit of money there. And we also did some reductions in our equipment codes, in our vendor services, and in our supplies. Then you drill down a little bit more, and you talk about staff. You'll see that this $36.8 million that we're proposing for next year is 95% of that previous number. So 95% of our costs in general education are staff. That's our business. It's teaching. Our business is people. So most of the expenses are going to be in staff salaries. What's included in that category is not just teachers, but it's going to be teaching assistants and other type of building aides and lunch aides. When we talk about our staff, that's in that code of the .1. Now let's focus in on the high school. So we talked about the general education overall, then we talked about staff salaries, and now we're talking about the high school staff, right? We're zeroing in a little bit more in funneling in. And you see here, that's going up about 1.47%. Again, most of that increase in cost is salary and step going up, but we're also increasing program a little bit, and I'm going to go and talk a little bit of the detail of the increase in program. We're going to have net of 0.4 FTE, which is the full-time equivalent of a teacher, increase in program, and you'll see how that plays out. Some departments are going up, and some departments are going down. Administrative expenditures are contained in different function codes. So not the A2110, which is our teaching code, stuff that happens in the classroom, but our administrators, curriculum development, our curriculum directors are in different functions, and we're going to be talking about that at a different time. Right now, we're focusing on the high school classroom experience, the high school program. So let's talk about some changes to the high school program. To respond to the growth and popularity of our ID Visual Arts program, we're projecting an increase of 0.1. We're responding to student interest. To respond to an increase in demand for our business classes, we added additional sections of career finance, sports marketing, principles of marketing, entrepreneurship, and IT business, for a total increase of an FTE, again, full-time equivalent, of 0.4. We are also going to change around some of how we provide math support. Mr. Myers is going, and the administration are going to be using a different model. They're going to be using math labs, the algebra Common Core classes. How are we going to fund that? Well, we're going to do some consolidation in our algebra and geometry classes. And the current enrollment, which is now about 17, is probably going to go up to about 21, which we still feel comfortable with. But it's going to enable us to take a subset of those students that need some extra help, an extra class, and we can give them a math lab class. So that's another important change in the high school program for next year. While most of our academic intervention services, we use the acronym AIS, will be administered as the labs that we just mentioned in order to increase student contact time, other services will consist of a full-time AIS teacher who will have separate small classes as opposed to doing the push-in model that we've had. And as we reviewed that, we realized that we could achieve an efficiency of about 0.2 in English. We're going to have a reduction of 0.3 FTE in family and consumer sciences because we've had a decrease in the selections for those classes. And we're also going to offer and some more classes in phys ed, introduction to martial arts, as well as what we think we're going to anticipate the need for some adaptive phys ed classes. So we're going to add a 0.4 teacher FTE in physical education at the high school. So you see some departments are going up because of whether it's demand for new classes or an interest in the program, while some others are going down. How are we going to deal with the increase of the 0.4 FTE in physical education? Was through some efficiencies that we've been able to achieve, and we plan to achieve rather, in elementary and the middle school level. So these are the numbers. I'm not going to go through each one of them. This will be on the website for those that don't have a copy of the presentation. And actually, if anybody needs a copy, I realized I forgot to distribute this at the beginning. I'm going to leave them right up here. Thank you. Sorry about that. Those are copies of the presentation. So you see here, it's all the different departments, and it shows what our current FTE is and what we're planning for next year. And that you see most of them are the same, except for the ones that I highlighted in the text slide before. We have actually 104.9 teacher FTEs at the high school. Included in that are our permanent subs. We have 4 permanent subs. We're going to keep the same next year. Our deans, because our deans are also considered in the teacher code, and we have a teacher in charge at night. These numbers and the dollar figures that I was talking about earlier do include staff in the Nike program. Okay, they're included in what we have here in this high school presentation. And you see the increase of the net of 0.4 for next year. At this point, I'd like to switch gears and talk a little bit about special education. Special education is a component part of pupil personnel services, which we call PPS. Special education has a function code of A2250. So different than what we just talked about, which was A2110, which is general education. A2250 is special education. So similar to what we had been talking about the past couple of weeks in general ed, we have salaries, we have equipment, we have vendor services, and we have supplies. All now in this function under special education. You see this code, this It's going up about 4.5%, or because we have such a big number here, $830,000. Why? Well, similar to general ed, because of some increases in staff salaries, because of step increases on a new salary schedule, but also because we are an increase in aides, an increase in teaching assistants, and an increase in aides. We took a look at what's been happening over the past couple of years, and what we're proposing, based on the trend that we've seen over the past couple of years, is a threefold increase in the number of aides than what we had planned for in the current year. And that's something that we're all talking about because we want to support students, but we also know that it is having an increase and an impact on our budget. And a big part of that increase between what's in the original budget for the current year and what we're proposing for next year has to do with the increase in the teaching assistants and the teacher aides. There is also one increase of a special education teacher based on need that we're going to have at the middle school, and that's also in there. And there's also an offset for a retirement to mitigate that increase in cost. Now, here's an example of a line by line. So within that 2250, right, that whole function of A2250, I sorted out a very important example of one line. This one line is now A2250.490. It has to do with BOCES. It has to do with the students that we send to BOCES. So we send them out because that's a better placement for them. You see here we have expecting an increase of about $200,000, and we're estimating about $100,000 each for each of those students, and we're projecting about 2 additional students from our district who are going to be going to a BOCES program. There are about 10 different BOCES programs that our students attend, and if I'm not mistaken, we have, I think it's about 34 students who are in those programs this year, and we're expecting 2 more for next year. Another line item that I wanted to highlight are the tuition that we pay for public schools that are out of district. So let's say we have a student that needs to go to a program in Harris, okay? We don't have the right placement here in Long Beach, but there's a better placement, a better program that's more appropriate to that student in another public school district. We also take in students from other districts to our programs here, okay? It's a way of being able to give a student what they need in a certain class, whether we have a self-contained, we have the 812s or the 1212s, and that specialize in a certain type of support for a student. In our district, other districts have classes that are a little bit different and are better for a different type of student. So a lot of times district will send students to each other's programs. We're anticipating sending about the same number of kids to these out-of-district schools, but there will be a rate increase, and it's something we have to deal with. You know, there's always going to, for these types of tuitions, a rate increase, and so we're projecting that, and you see a very small amount, about 2.5%, $5,000, not more students, but a rate increase for those students already attending public schools that are out of district. Another line item that I wanted to highlight is tuition that we send students who are going to New York State non-public schools. So we have a number of schools where they are private, they're not public, but they do offer programs for special education students. And there are times when parents placing students there themselves, or it is recommended by the Committee on Special Education, and we are required to pay tuition. So in this case, I wanted to contrast 2 other examples with one in which we anticipate 1 fewer student, and a couple of those students who are planning to switch to less expensive schools. So there will be line items, and it does happen, where we actually are going to be planning to spend a little less money than we plan to spend in the current year. And that's why I have it in green, because although it's a reduction, it is a good thing because it's saving the district a little bit of money. And that's what you have. You have some increases and some decreases. Another area of PPS, and I just wanted as a frame of reference to show all the different types of areas that are part of this pupil personnel services area, is attendance. So here's an example where we have all of the expenditures that we have in our attendance code, different function A21805, and you see here an increase of about 3.56%, and that's basically because of the step increases, right? So staff that are moving along the salary schedule, for next year it's a new salary schedule, they move along, and it costs the district about 3.5% for next year's salaries for the current staff. No changes in staff, just the increase in the salary costs. Another area that I wanted to highlight in tonight's presentation has to do with psychological services. Again, here, different function. Now we're in A2820, right? So you can orient yourselves when you're looking at our budget. This is district-wide. It's the whole function. So not only is it staff salaries, again, but it's also equipment, vendor services, and supplies. But here, the overwhelming majority of the cost is due to what we're proposing is a new full-time psychologist at the Nike program and an additional 0.4 FTE full-time equivalent at the middle school. So similar, kind of linking to what I was talking about earlier, when I was talking about some of what the district is doing to try to respond to what's happening throughout the country in terms of our security measures, in terms of what we can do for our buildings, in terms of what we can do with staff about protocol and operational procedures. Also, what we're looking to do is to support the mental health piece for our students. And one of the ideas that we had as an administrative team is to put a full-time psychologist at Nike and the additional 0.4 at the middle school. PPS, this function, A2830, is basically the PPS office staff. So it's the executive director, the clerical support that she has to properly carry out the functions of all the different departments, whether it's special ed, whether it's attendance, psychological services, social work, is going to be in this general A2830 code. And here we're not anticipating any changes in staff. It's just that step increase. You see there, now we have a 3.92, and the other slide we showed, I think, was about a 3.5. Depending on where you are in the step schedule or what type of position you have, it's going to vary slightly. But we're talking about, between 3.5% and 4% for the additional cost for the salary. And that's the presentation that we have for this evening, and I'm now happy to take questions from the board.
Thank you, Mr. DeVito. I just have one question regarding the classes that you're adding to the business department in the high school.
Yeah.
I see you're adding 4 classes, but just a 0.4 position. Are these half-year classes, or are they just being absorbed by other?
Okay, I'm going to ask Mr. Marnes, if you don't mind. He was warned that I'd be needing to help answer some of these questions. So why don't you come on up, Mr. Marnes, please, and help me field some of these questions.
Good evening. The classes that are in the business department that are being offered, I shared with Mr. DeVito some of the courses that we've offered the students. Right now, we're still in the building phase. We create the sections, but those are the courses that we are offering in general. Those aren't the specifics that go along with the 0.4. So it's probably going to be the additional beginner course with the entrepreneurship class. It wouldn't be an additional IB course, for example. But I don't have the numbers with me, but those are just some of the courses that we did offer. This year we had one business teacher that actually taught 6 different classes, and I believe he had 5 or 6 different preps. So from last year to this year, last year we had 75 to 100 students that were not able to enroll in a business course because we did not have the extra 0.4. So this year, by having the additional 0.4, we will have 1.6, which could be one teacher plus another teacher that will be able to teach 3 classes. And part of the reason that we've seen growth is that we've also added the new DECA program, which we have about 75 students, 40 to 75 students, which can show up at a time for this program that is gaining popularity. And
Club, right?
it's a DECA club, and they've really been involved in the industry advisory board and the virtual enterprise course. A lot of these different classes are helping it gain popularity. So, but those aren't all the courses.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Mr. DeVito, thank you so much for your wonderful presentations. I want to congratulate you, I think, on being asked to go to Texas. FEMA asked you, so you must be doing a pretty, I knew you were doing a good job, but when FEMA asked you to help other people figure out how to file their FEMA claims, you know you're doing a good job. So I think that it's tremendous advocacy for our district. You know, you put yourself out there and shared our experiences. Hopefully made FEMA move a little faster to return our money, but just the goodwill and the ability to give back from what we shared. I'm really proud of you. Congratulations on that. And congratulations on getting more money even before that, right? That was before you went. They gave you some money. So, do you want to talk about FEMA first, or do you want to talk about this presentation first?
Whatever you want.
Okay, because I did have some, after I saw that you got some more money from them, I see that they still owe us about $1.8 million. Are we in a position now where we can go to New York State and say, we've finished everything, we want the 10% that you promised us?
So what we can do is buy project worksheets. So what we've been able to do up to this point is submit what's called a progress payment. So they were confident with what we submitted to say that I feel comfortable giving you, let's say 90% for each of the project worksheets. And that amounts to, you know, what I had just said, about $24 million. So now that we're closing one project worksheet after the other, I think we have about 2 of them now, that then we get our final payment from FEMA, then we can say, okay, for West School, for example, we've closed out, we've received all of our FEMA money, then we can go to New York State. It can be on a rolling basis. So that's what we're up to now. So it's not like you go for all of them. It's when the actual project worksheet is officially closed by FEMA. And unfortunately, it's a bit of a lengthy process because there's that quality review that they go through. So we've had a wonderful representative from FEMA work with us. And they sit and they come to my office about sometimes once a week, sometimes once every other week. And they go through the documentation, and they sit and they make copies. And then they have to submit it to another FEMA representative in the quality control unit. And then they help and advocate on our behalf. And it's a lengthy process because we are talking about a lot of money. But I feel comfortable that we're in a good place to start getting some of that 10% money from New York State.
And will the state use this voluminous, complete, overly done paperwork that you've done for FEMA? Will we then be able to just turn around and hand that to the state and say, FEMA took it, give us our money?
I think so.
All right. So do we have any timeline on that? It would be just so nice to be able to put this to bed.
I wish I knew. You know, it's hard to get some of that information from them. They don't give us a lot of it.
Okay. Okay. With respect to this presentation, it was great. It was brief, but full of detail at the same time. I just had a couple of more general kinds of questions. My first question is this the presentation where I talk about extracurricular activities and where we're going and how much we're spending on extracurricular activities?
I'd say you're welcome to ask the question now because we finished up the high school general ed component, but on the 22nd is when we're going to talk about the extracurricular.
Okay, I guess I'm wondering what the thinking is with respect to that. Is that going to stay the same? Is that going to increase? I know this is now my 4th year on the board, but for a number of years before I got on the board, at least 2 or 3, extracurriculars were cut and cut and cut. So I'm wondering where we're going in terms of the funding, and maybe I guess you'll answer these on the 22nd.
Yeah, but I can tell you just off the bat, we're not looking to cut any net. You know, there may be a shifting around of a few things. I know for one thing, for our athletics, we're looking to start a new bowling program, so we'll be able to talk a little bit more about that. And we're not looking to cut on a net basis, any club or any athletic program, but there may be a little bit of shifting.
you know, off the top of my head, the first one that comes to mind is the robotics club, which we know if we're going to have a net neutral figure on extracurriculars, we're not going to be able to afford that. So I guess that's where my questions are going to go when we talk about extracurriculars. Where in this budget can we find more money for what I consider to be frontline student engagement?
So,
You know?
so I would like to respond by saying that after we've done our due diligence in taking a look at attendance at some of the clubs, and if we feel, and we have to still, consult with other administrators, that there is going to be a request for more support. So let's say that we need to shift clubs A and B to club maybe C and D, but then we realize that we want to add a club and all the others are well attended, and it's an opportunity to engage students, new students, other students that aren't already engaged, then I will ask for an increase in the budget to support that club. So if it turns out that we can't self-fund robotics because there are clubs that just, there's no interest, I am going to ask to increase the budget in order to support robotics or any other club. So we started those conversations, but we hope to complete those by the 22nd.
Okay, now, some time ago, Dr. Gallagher, you had told us that you were doing an evaluation of all our extra help / support programs. And I see in this presentation on the high school, you mentioned AIS and that will be provided in a lab format. I'm not sure I understand what that is. Is that a new
No.
way
So
of delivery?
there's a little bit of a combination of two different ideas there. What we discussed doing, the lab would be associated with all algebra classes, not actually geometry yet, although we hope to roll this model forward if it's successful. We've had some difficulty with our math scores, especially algebra, which is the fundamental class and the one that students need for graduation. And in looking at models in other districts that were successful, we saw that the one that was most successful was adding a lab class to students in Algebra 1, regardless of AIS. It has nothing to do with AIS, that piece. So each Algebra 1 class will have an attached lab every other day in the fall. And that's something that we were able to do just with that slight increase in class size in algebra. The AIS piece is actually the English piece. For years, we've been providing AIS for students who still have reading difficulty in the high school by pushing in English teachers to the existing 9th and 10th grade classes. What we've decided to do next year again to evaluate whether or not it's more effective is to pull some of those students out or pull them out to a separate group rather than providing a push-in teacher for the entire class to really target the students who need the most help in English. That's budget neutral. In fact, they actually saved a bit by consolidating that. It's the math that took a little bit of juggling to fix. Okay. Now, just one more thing. We are in the process of evaluating all interventions. We did Regents review last year and made changes in that process because of that. We did ENL last year at the high school level specifically. And we right now have a consultant who's helping us look at all of our AIS and reading intervention programs specifically at the elementary level. Once she finishes her evaluation, she'll provide a report which I'll share with the Board of Education. I expect to be able to do that probably in the beginning of May.
Okay.
But that's a quality eval, not a budget
Okay,
eval.
okay. All right, so I have, you're talking two different things here. It's my understanding that the special ed teacher that was in the 9th and 10th grade English class was there for purposes more other than...
I'm not talking about the special ed teacher.
Okay, you're talking about a reading
Another-
teacher. Okay.
or another
all right.
general
Okay, then
English
we're going to
teacher.
let go of that. Okay. So this budget has all of the same extra help schedules, the same stipends for Regents review, the same all intervention. There's been no change. We have not made a decision that there's any intervention that is either qualitatively good or qualitatively bad yet. Is that correct?
Well, no, I don't know if you reflected this in the budget, Mr. DeVito, but we did cut back on Regents Review because we did evaluate that effectiveness last year and saw that really by and large, it was not working effectively. Students weren't attending regularly, and the benefit, the analysis of their grades really had no measurable effect in terms of whether they attended extra help or not.
Okay, extra help or Regents Review?
I mean Regents Review.
Okay, all right. So we're not going to have Regents Review?
We cut it back drastically
Okay,
this year.
for January, but more
For June.
kids for June. Okay,
As well.
okay. So, and we'll hear that same result with respect to all the other interventions our students have.
So there are no other interventions that would result in that kind of a budgetary savings. It's
Okay.
the other interventions that we're analyzing is from the perspective of whether they're effective or not, or if we have to use a different intervention. But that would be cost neutral.
Okay, so there's no really big intervention budgetary issue. The
No.
fact that you're having less Regents Review is not going to impact.
There will be a change. It's about probably a savings of about $40,000, but we will probably use that money to provide reading students or a small group review during the day.
Okay. What about I remember hearing about the Read to Success program that was going to be added into the budget. Is that a high school program or is that an elementary program? No. Read to Success.
Oh, I know what you mean. Read to Succeed.
Read to Succeed, I'm sorry.
So actually, it's a preschool program, and we are investigating bringing that in. That would not be for next year, though. We have to do about a year planning on that. And the program, if we can do it, is a great program because it allows anyone who lives in the Long Beach community, and it's targeting preschool, meaning birth to age 3, families to access books online in Spanish and English, high-quality literature for free. And they use a geofilter on their platform so that they ensure that everybody who uses it are actually residents of Long Beach. So we're looking to bring that in, but that'll be for the following year.
All right, that's all I have. Thank you again.
Brian?
I just have a few questions. I want to thank you, Mr. DeVito. I also want to congratulate you on being invited down to Texas. It's a nice honor, and I'm sure you helped them as you helped us get through the aftermath of the superstorm.
Thank you.
I have a number of questions on the presentation. But before I say those, I just want to preface my remarks with Mrs. Verona's comment about cuts. Most districts have been able to reach sustainability or maintain balance above water by making those program cuts. And we have not in terms of that. And heretofore we've been pretty successful in terms of passing budgets, but maintaining the operational word is sustainability, which I don't like. But we basically been able to maintain programs. We hope to do so. But specifically, I have a couple of questions about what was inherent in the report. First, the visual arts teacher, the .1. So I suspect we won't be looking to get a .1 teacher, but we'll just make the teacher 1.1.
No, actually, there is one art teacher who's .6, I believe, and she'll go to .7.
Good to hear. It's new to me in terms of the full-time psychologist at Nike. I think that needs discussion in terms of cost and benefit. I think we might consider, just off the top of my head, moving reach workers that are present in high school, maybe down at Nike, to offset that cost. There is, I believe, presently counseling services provided, but that's an issue that struck me that I think we need to discuss further. Certainly I need to discuss further, or need discussions in terms of that. I noticed summer school for both special ed and high school were not included in this presentation. Are those separate line items in terms of that, or are those included in the program?
Different function, and if you'd like, we can put that on a future presentation so that we could talk a little bit about that.
Okay. And just off the top of your head, would you know, Dr. Gallo, do you know the savings roughly that the district realized by moving to BOCES last year for summer programming rather than district programming for summer school?
I'm going to estimate, and I believe it was around $80,000, but I will check and get you that number.
All right, I'd be grateful for that. Thank you. And I just wanted to address Mrs. Bruno's other question about extracurricular clubs and cuts. To my knowledge, the cuts have only been effected there when in fact student interest was very low. You know, I've been, Mr. Myers, you could have made my day by including a high school newspaper in this presentation because I've been lobbying unsuccessfully for a high school newspaper. So when extracurriculars come up, even if it's not a reality, you can certainly make my day by saying maybe there's consideration for a high school newspaper because I've been banging that drum unsuccessfully. And I also wanted to ask about the reach at the high school. I thought a board member last year, I might be wrong, had asked for that we send out RFPs for that service. Do we intend to do that, or are we just going to roll over reach? Am I mistaken? Does any other board member remember
I
that?
think maybe we would, but after Mr. Weiss left.
There was discussion about that, so I'd be grateful to do that. Yeah, I was sorry to see a decrease in family and consumer sciences after the allocation for the oven, but hopefully those that are still there will make good use of the oven, the allocated oven that was appropriated for that program. So once again, thank you for the presentation, and I look forward to those that are coming down the pike.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan. I would just like to say something about that. So it is interesting, as you note, that there has been a decrease in some of the course selections for family and consumer science. But one of the things that we had talked about in our capital projects presentation was converting and really doing a gut renovation of the that culinary area and having a program that could really rival what they have at BOCES, so that we didn't have to send our students to BOCES. So I think we need to just differentiate between the fact that we do want to build that program and we don't have maybe the interest right now for the courses that we have, but we would like to invest in a new culinary arts program, room, facility, and maybe then that would build some interest there and also ultimately save us some money because we do send some students to BOCES for that purpose. And I know that is something that's part of our capital plan, and it was going to be a topic that I was going to cover at next week's presentation when we talk a little bit more about items in the budget where we transfer money to capital in addition to the ballot proposition that we have that I mentioned earlier on. So I would like to differentiate between those two phenomena.
Yeah, it's very hard sitting up here. You know, I guess I've been up here for 10 years because what happens is interests sort of wax and wane. Sometimes things are hot, you want to help, and then no sooner do you than that sort of such interest sort of wanes. So that's one of the difficulties in terms of we're trying to be so pathetic in terms of up here and projecting and looking at budget and trying to do the right thing. But once again, thank you for your presentation. I look forward to future presentations. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. DeVito, for the presentation, and you are truly a great representative to go to Texas for, on our behalf anyway, and all that you have done after Sandy for this school district, and you really should be applauded for what you've done.
Thank you.
And your staff as well. But I do have a couple of questions. If you could just elaborate a little bit on the Regents review, because I have a feeling I may get some questions on this if we are cutting Regents review. You said that it would be a $40,000 savings roughly, and you would put that money towards a more detailed or a smaller.
So what I've asked the high school staff to do is to try to look at other ways that we can provide remediation and review, especially for the students who need it the most. I think one of the phenomena we saw with Regents Review is the students who needed it weren't necessarily the ones who lent. It was the students with a 95 who just wanted to get that little extra boost, which is great. We want to support them as well. But when we were spending upwards of $60,000 on Regents Review. And I think that we need to look for ways to target students who really need remediation and help. So the high school has worked, and they've done some of it already. We've had some review sessions during the day, early morning, but not necessarily that just the rollover of the same number of hours we've had every year.
Okay, and that would start?
It started around,
Okay.
I just want to correct myself, in January, we did that with the January regions, and we are also going to do that with June. The approval for those teachers' hours will come up within the next couple of weeks.
Okay, great. The other, BOCES students, the amount of students that we send to BOCES was roughly in the 30s, 34, 30 for specialized. That's consistent from year to year?
You know, it's been going up 1 and 2. So as some of the board members may recall, a couple of years ago, we were anticipating an increase, and it turned out we ended the year with a little bit of a surplus in that code, because we actually were sending 2 fewer kids to the BOCES program. That was 2 years ago. Last year, it grew by 2, and then we're expecting it to grow by 2 again next year. So now we're at a similar level to where we were a couple of years ago. So sometimes there's an ebb and flow, but I think right now we're seeing a trend of an increase to those placements.
Now, when we discuss adding clubs, and we're discussing robotics in particular, because I've had this conversation for several years with you, if we're doing it for the high school, to be a true competitive robotics club, we need to grow from the elementary level. So how would we see that in our budget if we were to add robotics?
I may need to get back to you on that one
Okay.
next week. Let me consult with my colleagues and see what we would have to do, like you said, to have it be a robust, competitive high school program, so that we have people who are ready to compete at that level. And if that's something the board would like, we can certainly go back and see what that would mean and what the impact would be on the budget.
Okay, great, thank you. And lastly, the full-time psychologist at Nike, could you just share with us the reason why you felt it necessary to put it in the budget?
If I may, Andrew, would like to share a little bit about the thought behind that. I know it was something that we've been talking about as a central administrative team for a while, and we felt, considering what's happening right now, that now is an opportune time to do that, but I'm going to defer to my colleague to talk a little bit about the details.
Thank you.
So the conversation around the support to the Nike program was based on the needs of the students that we have been seeing over the course of the last several years. Many of the students that attend the Nike program are students that not only are students with a disability, but very often they have they're emotionally disabled. They have mental illness. Out of the cohort or group of students that we see for next year, and this goes back a couple of months, there's 36 somewhat student profiles that I took a look at, and within that profile we had students that not only had mental illness documented, but also had substance abuse and were involved in some form of the court system at some level. So when I was engaging in conversations with the administration, along with some staff that were over there, the need and the amount of time that those students need in support, I felt that the support was clinical support and it needed to be full-time. The amount of time that is spent with students when they walk in is very often can take hours to get them at a place where they're available to learn. And that what I mean by that is very often you're sitting with them individually and counseling them through what happened minutes before, what happened the night before, et cetera, and they're not available to learn. So while it's a small group of students, and it may go up next year, I felt that it needed the expertise of the psychologist for that piece. In addition to that, there are students with disabilities. So by having a psychologist present there, they're also a CSE chairperson, a subcommittee chairperson. They're also someone who could do the evaluation, so it would be part and parcel of their responsibility, not having to rely on another staff member to come from another building. It made it more cohesive.
So to Dr. Ryan's point regarding REACH counselors, in your opinion, was that if we move the REACH counselors there, for a portion of their time, would that suffice and meet the needs, do you believe, would meet the needs of some of the students at night?
My understanding of their credential is either they're a drug and alcohol counselor, they may be a social worker, although I'm not clear on what their background is. So they would not be able to meet the needs of the CFE responsibilities, so that would eliminate that. If they don't have a clinical expertise in mental illness, that would eliminate that component. So they may be able to deal with the drug and alcohol issues, but I think that it goes beyond the scope of that. I think that the students that are there really need to have somebody who can case manage them from various aspects, not just from that one area of drug and alcohol.
Thank you.
Can I ask one final question there? Do you think that putting a full-time psychologist at Nike is gonna, for lack of a better phrase, make the difference? Will it?
I think there are other aspects to the Nike program. So when you look at a program that has been an alternative program, we need to decide what that means. So there are students there that need to have an environment that's smaller. They just can't make it. They can't physically walk into the high school. It's large. It's overwhelming. They don't have the social capacity, many of them. Many of them are not able to attend school at all. And then later on, we find them attending the Nike program because it's a smaller, more cohesive program. So that's one piece. The second piece is, do we want to emphasize the vocational aspect in the work readiness part of the program? And that would be an area to take a look at. Many of these students don't feel as though they are able to engage with other people. They feel like they're a side group of students and they're not integrated at all. So the conversations about volunteering and work readiness will engage these students, and it's an alternative way of learning. So I think that's a piece. I think the other piece is that from a behavioral aspect and a structural aspect, many of them have difficulty when demands or when rules and regulations are placed upon them. They have to understand that that's the way society is. And so by building in a structured program that allows for some leveled systems, which is often seen in an alternative program, will also improve the program. So I don't think it's just the answer. I think it's part of what they need, absolutely. But I also think there are other parts of Nike that needs to be taken a look at to make sure that we're servicing all of the students. There are a number of students, not even at Nike, that would fit into the profile of that program if it was designed and it was cohesive. That's just one aspect.
So, Dr. Gallagher, is someone doing that? What she just said?
Yeah. So that conversation has been happening since September, actually prior to September. As you know, Mrs. Neway is retiring, so we're looking at a new administrator for Nike. We are looking at this model as a whole different model than what we've had before, and we're looking at evaluating the staff that we have there and the type of program that we're offering to try to really create the program that can best serve these students' needs. It's a small amount of students, and I understand, the concern about resources for a small amount of students, but I would urge the board to consider the alternative to not serving these students. For these students, Nike is the difference between a high school diploma or not. It can be the difference in their success in life or not. And I think that we owe it to them as a school community to consider not equality, but equity in terms of providing them what they need, just as we provide IB students what they need and provide special education students what they need and provide other students at other levels what they need. I think they're a segment of our community that we have a tremendous responsibility to.
I'd just like to address the point, since I guess I raised it in terms of the budget. And that is, it used to be an annual right to go visit the classrooms there. And when I did those visitations, I saw a lot of sterile classrooms. And I think that too needs to be configured in this whole equation. That as a psychologist and having spent my whole career there, I agree with you in terms of the therapeutic, but it's not a mental health clinic. down there. It is a school. And I don't think any teenager is going to want to spend all or a good part of the day with a psychologist. And I think we have to look at the instructional part of that program, because I think we lose a lot of kids in that regard. And I've been in rooms where you wouldn't even know the kids came into the rooms. There was no glimmer of student work, textbooks, instructional resources that you would want to see in the classroom. So in terms of this, and since I began it, I'll continue it. I applaud you for raising it. I would expect you to, and I think you should advocate for your department and kids. I disagree with Dr. Gallagher because the equity question is, what do 35 get as opposed to 1,265 in terms of that? And I don't know whether we ever reach equity in terms of education, but it doesn't prevent us from striving that way. But in terms of the instructional part, I think it really needs a serious look before we go into any kind of related services, because I think that's the crux of the issue in terms of these kids. And if we're not servicing them, I don't think we're servicing them in that regard as well as we should be. And I don't expect to respond to you on
I
that one.
have one, but I'm open to myself, Dr. Hines, but I do have a response. There.
Anybody else? Student organization announcements, anybody here? Questions and comments from the public on tonight's agenda only?
I have a question. I'd like to know who the school's medical director is.
Dr. Richard,
Is considered the medical director of our district?
may I respond? So, we do an appointment at the reorganization meeting in July, and there's someone that we appoint as the medical director. We have a contract with Dr. Richard, we have also a contract with Dr. Manzone. She's not the medical director, but she's a district physician, and they get a certain amount of money every month to handle different types of responsibilities related to the district. They will conduct physicals, they do different types of medical exams when warranted through HR, and there's, in the contract itself, there's a scope of services that lists what each of them does. But there's one medical director, and that's Dr. Richard. He's been the medical director for several years.
I didn't know that he held it. I didn't know that he held that title. And
Not as an employee, but just there is that title, medical director, as a contractor.
so if, as a contracted doctor, is he required to service us for a certain amount of days, hours, and appointments? Because we're having real issues in this
Okay.
area. So maybe outside of this meeting, we could sit down and have a discussion on that.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you. I won't be able to stay much longer because I have another obligation, but I just really wanted to thank the district for your decision to call a snow day yesterday. I know you're under a lot of pressure, and I know you're taking a lot of heat for it, but it was very refreshing, and it was very comforting to know that safety was put first in light of the projected forecast. It meant a lot as a bus driver, and as just an employee, it meant a lot that you all, without a snowflake falling and you're taking a lot of heat, you really put safety first, and we appreciate it, and I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you. Is there a motion to accept the treasurer's report?
Motion.
Vote. Mrs. Tagny? No. I'm sorry. Approval of the minutes from the executive session.
Second.
Ms. Tagny?
Yes.
Ms. Rona?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Yes. Dr. Gallagher?
I don't vote. I'd like to take certificated matters together.
Okay. Motion?
Second.
Discussion? Mrs. Tagny?
Yes.
Whoa, you're too quick for me. Item 1G and 1F, what is the challenge of
As an after-school program?
Yes.
Extracurricular?
Excellent. Okay. That's all I have.
I don't think the public heard the response.
It's for our special education life skills students.
Mrs. Tagny?
I vote yes.
Mrs. Rowan?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
I vote yes.
Non-certificated personnel?
Motion made.
Second.
Discussion? Take a vote. Mrs. Tagny?
Yes.
Mrs. Rowan?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
I vote yes.
I'd like to take items 3 through 12 together.
Motion made.
Second.
Discussion?
Yes, I have a question concerning use of school. I recall in an earlier discussion that there was going to be construction in some of our elementary schools over the summer. So their use for summer camps was going to be somewhat questioned. Off the agenda? New agenda? Okay, I'm working off the old agenda. So the West School and those people aren't on the agenda anymore.
No.
It's likely that those schools will not be able to be used, but we're still finalizing the details, and I plan to talk about that at the next meeting.
All right, very good, thank you.
Mrs. Tagny?
Yes.
Well, I have some questions. Mr. DeVito, there's an award of, number 7A, award of bids to Troy and Banks. It appears that we're going to be having our electric bills audited. Isn't this something that the energy performance people just did when they came in and audited all of those types of services?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Rowan. That's an interesting question because they did do an audit, you remembered correctly, but it was a different kind of an audit. So the audit that the energy performance contract vendor did was to determine our baseline usage. So the whole concept of the energy performance contract is that they are going to do building upgrades, such as changing out the lighting, so that we can reduce our energy usage. And therefore, the savings that we achieve will be able to fund some of the work that we're doing throughout the district, like put on the new roof at the high school, at West School, and some other overall building upgrades. This energy audit that's on the agenda is to make sure that the energy companies are charging us the correct rate. We did some of that work ourselves over the past couple of years, but it's at no charge to the district. It's a service. We did a request for proposal. It was a competitive process, and this particular vendor came in with the best deal for the district. And all we can do is see if there's any money to be saved. So it's at no cost to the district.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I just ask once again, as I've asked in the past, when we do have a bid that's being put up for vote, it would be very helpful for me sometimes to see what some of the other bids were. And we had asked that maybe they be listed on the agenda in terms of that. So I would ask once again that that be considered.
Okay, I know that we have it in the backup, Dr. Ryan.
Yeah.
So, Mrs. Butler, if you don't mind, and I don't know, Mrs. Fraser, is that something that we can put in the actual resolution? Listing, I'm just not sure if we're legally allowed to do something like that.
It can be put as part of the information when you are then voting on the bidder who's selected for the job. You can put the various bids on the main bid.
Okay, so if I could ask you to send us a template resolution so that we can do that, because we've always had it in the backup, and I know that we're going to be doing a lot of work again, some capital work, and I'll be more than happy. It is a public process, and it is something that there's no problem doing, but I'd just like to do it correctly.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Call for a vote. Ms. Tagny?
Yes.
Ms. Verona?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
I vote yes. Okay. Board of Education, additional comments, new business?
I just wanted to ask, last meeting there was great discussion about code of conduct. I'd like to know where we are.
So
2
in
weeks.
response to the discussion at the last meeting, both middle school and high school are circulating the code to students staff for feedback, and we will revisit it with the policy committee and put it back on, but probably not until after the budget vote.
Okay. I'd also ask Mr. Butler to please give a,
One other thought on the code of conduct. Parents were also notified, but no, all the high school parents got notices. And I would encourage any high school parents out there to read the code of conduct and send your comments in. Mr. Myers is desperately waiting for comments, right?
and could Mr. Butler, could you please just give a brief synopsis of the most recent meeting with Highland Park trustees?
Yes, we're preparing the rollover agreement to extend the contract for one more year, and then going to engage in discussion for an extended contract, an exclusive contract for the future. Anybody else?
Oh, wait, I have some thoughts. I went to National History Day in the middle school. All the 7th graders participated. It was the inaugural kickoff. It was great. You should all go see it next year. They did presentations all day, had videotapes if you missed them during the day. It was wonderful. So kudos to everybody who was involved in that. I know I've asked a couple of times in this, and I hate to bother you, Mr. DeVito, because I know how busy you are, but before we get to a final budget, we really need a food services update. We need to know where we're going with that. If frozen yogurt is really going to save the day, we need to know. So if we could get that information soon. I know I read that I listened to all of your comments about security measures, and I think we've done a great job. Not in response, but as a matter of course, we've done a good job with the security measures in our buildings. But recently I read from the administrative team that the Nassau County Police Department had offered to come in and do a security update, a security audit, which we're going to have to. And there was a recommendation, I think maybe from Mr. DeVito or maybe from the architect, of proposing some way that we could lock down the high school cafeteria, because that seems to be a difficult area. So I guess we're going to hear more details of those as...
Yes.
So next week, when we talk about the ballot proposition, I'll be able to go into a little bit more detail. The architect at this point had given us 2 proposals of his ideas for work. It's expensive work. It's about $400,000. And I need to talk about that with the high school team and see which proposal they'd like us for the single point of entry. And then when, let's say, somebody goes through a door that they shouldn't, then we'll get an alert to the security guard and we'll be able to determine what's happening. Right? So there are different things that we're putting into place in terms of protocols and the technology, but we're in some buildings we have that single point of entry, and that's like a standard accompanying visitors, things of that protocols that we've already made sure it's being adhered to. It was put into place before in some areas. We're making sure there's more greater vigilance in adhering to those protocols.
May I just sort of jump in, Mrs. Rowan, on that issue? We had asked when Mr. Garcia made this presentation in the fall, just about concern about after-school activities, because school doesn't stop at 2:30, but fields and gyms and the whole plants are being used. So I was happy to see that contingency being examined as well, Mr. DeVito. And concerning food, I think you did send something, and it looks like $350,000 seems to be the magic number in terms of what we're going to be running in the red in terms of the food program this year.
Yeah, that's correct, Dr. Ryan. We are going to still have that same number. Mrs. Verona had asked for a little bit more detail in terms of the impact of the frozen yogurt, and I've been working with Mr. Camlet on putting something that together. It's just not ready yet.
It might be a good idea when you have a lockdown in the high school cafeteria to have the yogurt handy.
I want the records, the pages, while I'm eating the frozen yogurt, all right?
We'll see what we can do.
All right. The last thing is, I know we've been working on a traffic study, particularly at the Lido complex and the high school. And I'm just wondering if we have a timeline on when we can expect to receive that.
Yep, happy to talk about that one. So our traffic study consultants have been in the district, they met with staff, they had cameras installed, they gathered a lot of data, and some of the feedback that they received from some of our staff and some of our parents was that they would like the consultants to take a look at what happens in our buildings when there's warm weather. So they've put together a preliminary draft. We're going to review that at the next Health and Safety Committee meeting. That was the reason why we postponed the committee meeting. It was supposed to take place this past Tuesday, but the traffic consultants weren't ready, and we wanted it to be a productive meeting. So we made it to the end of the month. We're going to review that, but they're also going to gather more data on a warm day when we have lots of students on bicycles and walking to make sure that they see it in the wintertime and they see it in the nice weather. And then they'll issue a final report that then the board can consider how we're going to act. And based on talking to the different stakeholders, they didn't mind waiting a couple of months for that comprehensive report.
So what does that how does that work in terms of the budget? Because if this traffic report recommends that we make changes that are going to cost money, where would that money come from? Or would it have to wait a full year?
You know what I can do is I can find out a little bit more from the consultants about because part of it was not so much a major cost, it was like a reconfiguration, and hopefully the idea we had meets out is working with the town of Hempstead and some other, municipal offices to collaborate. But I can find out a little bit more about it. It's something that we need to have a placeholder for in the budget. Thank you for that.
One couple of things. I attended the sports awards this week, and I want to congratulate all of our winter season athletes, coaches, and their parents. I want to give a special recognition to Coach Ray Adams for being named New York State Wrestling Coach of the Year. Liza Rodriguez, a two-time New York State champion, and Corey Teamer, a five-time New York State Wrestling champion. Congratulations. I just want to make a quick update on the superintendent search. The board met with the consultants this week. We did a pre-screening of candidates. We're anticipating interviews in the coming week, and hopefully we'll have a resolution soon. Thank you. Question and comments from the public?
Hi, I'm Madison Gosselin. I live at 71 Garden Street, and I'm in the 11th grade, and I'm a diploma candidate, and I'm the one that signed high school up for the national walkout. I came here to tell you all today a little more about the walkout and why I decided to do it. This is a campaign directly posted on the website for the National School Walkout. Women's March Youth Empower is calling for students, teachers, school administrators, parents to analyze and take part in a national school walkout for 17 minutes at 10 a.m. across every time zone on March 14, 2018. To protest Congress's inaction to do more than tweet thoughts and prayers in response to the gun violence plaguing our schools and neighborhoods. We need action. Students and allies are organizing the National School Walkout to demand Congress pass legislation to keep us safe from gun violence at our schools, on our streets, and in our homes and places of worship. Students and staff have the right to teach and learn in an environment free from the worry of being gunned down in their classrooms or on their way home from school. Parents have the right to send their kids to school in the morning and see them home alive at the end of the day. We are not safe at school. We are not safe in our cities and towns. Congress must take meaningful action to keep us safe and pass federal gun reform legislation that addresses the public health crisis of gun violence. We want Congress to pay attention and take note. Many of us will vote this November, and many others will join in 2020. Join us in saying enough. I signed our school up to sit for 17 minutes in silence on the bleachers by the football field on March 14th. Beginning at 10 a.m., we will have a minute of silence for each life lost in Parkland. I'm not saying I know the answers or the solutions to make our environment a safer place, but I do know there needs to be more done by Congress and many others. The reason I signed the school up for the walkout is because I agree with the message they have that there needs to be more action. After asking around and hearing only rumors of what could happen and how we could get suspended for participating, I wanted to get real answers. I went to the website to find that Long Beach High School was not signed up to participate. This was something that I really wanted to partake in, and I'm aware of the seriousness it needs to be handled. That's when I contacted the school and made sure they were aware the high school would be signed up and the plan of action we will be taking so they can provide any safety measures they believe should be taken. Whether we have to face consequences or not, many of us are walking out either way. Although I do believe the timing works out that if the directions are followed, the worst case scenario is that participants will be late to class. We really are just trying to take what action we can and make sure our voices are heard as we try to make a difference. If there are any more questions, you can find more details in my email at the link on the poster going around the internet. Thank you very much, and we hope you can support us as we walk for something we believe in.
Thank you.
Madison, we want to thank you. That was excellent. And I want to applaud you for taking a stand and taking a leadership position in your community. That's what we want students to do. Civic engagement is part of all of our responsibilities. And I feel proud of Long Beach High School for producing someone who is taking that responsibility seriously. Tomorrow, a letter will go home to parents in the high school explaining our kind of approach to this. And I liked your flyer that you're really focusing on the fact that it's, honoring for 17 minutes, honoring 17 students almost as a tribute to them. We have some concerns about your safety, especially when we're announcing that students are going to go outside. But we will certainly keep talking to you and student leaders about how we can be a school that helps our students take stands, but is neutral about what those stands are. And for the event next week, we really believe that it's a tribute to those 17 students and a memorial to them. And we hope that the activities that the high school is planning during the day, which is encouraging students to become civically engaged, write letters to their elected officials about whatever issues they're passionate about, will produce more students like you who take leadership roles. But again, we have to look at it from that perspective, but also from the perspective of safety and making our school a space where all students are free to express their views safely and with support. Thank you.
Announcements? CTA?
Karen Boone, CTA. Just want to congratulate all the students on their awards. Mr. DeVito on your trip to Texas. Sounds fun. And thank you again for yesterday. It was nice flying it out early. Thank you. Have a good night.
Administrative support, CPS? Parent teachers, CTA?
Hi, Sharon Powers from PTA. I wasn't going to be talking about this and didn't think that I had anything to say until you just said that you're going to choose the superintendent and not involve any parents in interviews or any kind of committee. So I'm a little surprised to hear that.
The consultants had reached out with surveys and focus groups prior to soliciting their candidates, and now that they've solicited candidates and are recommending candidates, we're going to be interviewing and looking at who they select.
Okay, I understand that, and we participated in that, and we appreciate that. But that doesn't mean that you chose based on what we suggested. So how would we know that if we didn't get to meet those people, where we're involved in every other kind of decision like this? And this is such a big one. Why would you skip us? Why would you skip the parents? Why would you skip having the regular interview people, or at least hearing our opinion before you choose someone that we are going to have to be working with? That doesn't make any sense. I'm protesting.
The process we had decided upon was to go the route that
You decided, but we, okay, I'm sorry.
that's what the board decided that we were going to go
That we
from.
were never going to be involved?
Well, the involvement was prior to.
Prior to was great, because then we got to give the kind of things, the kind of qualities we wanted. We appreciate that. But why shouldn't we be involved in the process? Why shouldn't we meet the people to make sure that the right people are brought in? I would assume you're going to have 3 or 4 candidates. Why are you skipping this? That doesn't make any sense. Can someone give me a really good explanation for every other thing we're involved in and not this?
Well, the proposal was to do it the other way this time and get the input first. And then,
You got input on the qualities that we were looking for, but you did not get our input on the candidates. How could we know the candidates? I love that you asked our input. They were terrific. But now we need to know that you chose the right people. Why shouldn't you get our opinion on that?
You're absolutely right, Mrs. Powers, and the present position of the board doesn't reflect my position. I think in terms of the process that not only PTA, but each of the respective unions should have representation, and possibly a representative from the high school and Island Park in terms of meeting the candidates. And once again, I'll preface it by saying the appointment of a superintendent rests solely with the Board of Education. So it's certainly within our province of doing it, or members of the board are. But in terms of the ultimate process, whoever the finalists are, should be brought before those people. And I also think they should be brought before central administration, because oftentimes they're the people that are going to work with this individual as well. And all those people should be engaged before a final recommendation is made. So I don't disagree with you on this point.
motion to adjourn?
Second.
Favor? All in favor? Aye.